Coming up on Quest, discover how an innovative engineering solution is improving the lives of refugee women in Darfur. Explore the environmental and cultural impacts of a new ban on shark fins.
73 million sharks every year.
And go behind the scenes with the first woman to travel in space as a working scientist.
It was a dream, and not everyone gets a dream.
Next on Quest.
Support for Quest is provided by the National Science Foundation, the David B. Gold Foundation, the S.D. Bechtel Jr. Foundation, the Dirk and Charlene Kabcenell Foundation, the Vadasz Family Foundation, George G. and Jeanette A. Stuart Charitable Trust, and the members of KQED. Quest is a project of KQED Science.
One fateful day in 2004, Berkeley engineering physicist Ashok Gadgil's phone rang. It was the Office of Foreign Disaster Assistance, part of the U.S. Agency for International Development. The officer was asking for help in Africa.
And he said, literally, that the Darfur refugee women are being raped in droves as they must leave the safety of the camps to gather fieldwood. Can you do something about it?
Darfur is a region in western Sudan, the largest country in Africa. Since 2003, it has been the location of ongoing conflict.
Since the Darfur crisis started, I was aware of what was going on and felt terrible about it. But like most of us, I didn't think I could help.
In 2003, following a series of tribal and political uprisings, the Sudanese government sanctioned violent militias called the Janjaweed to destroy entire villages in Darfur. Since then, a brutal campaign has targeted civilians, killing more than 400,000 people and fundamentally altering their way of life. More than a decade after the beginning of the conflict, 1.4 million people still live in refugee camps. Traditionally, the women gather and sell wood for cooking, but the camps were densely packed, and by the time Gadgil received the call, fuel wood had already become scarce. Women were forced to travel far outside the camps, often walking for up to 7 hours to find wood. Any encounter with the Janjaweed militiamen almost certainly would result in rape.
About 20% of the camp residents are men, but if the men get caught outside, they are killed. It's a horrible choice.
So what could a physicist in Berkeley, California possibly do to help Darfuri refugees? Well, when Gadgil learned that the women cook by placing a round pot on a 3-stone fire, he knew that it was possible to engineer some relief.
3-stone fire is the least efficient way to take energy from the fuel wood and turn it into heat into the pot. Typical 3-stone fire efficiency is 5 to 6%. There is poor combustion, chemical energy doesn't go into heat, and there is poor heat transfer. That means that heat doesn't go into the pot. So I figured one should be able to design a stove that should be cheap, should work with their pots, with their fuel, with their cooking style, and something that should be at least 25–30% efficient. That's a 4-fold gain in their efficiency. And that means instead of going out every other day, they would go out once a week.
In 2005, Gadgil led a fact-finding team into the heart of the conflict. What they learned there from talking with Sudanese women and their families laid the foundation for designing a better cook stove.
5 things go into determine efficiency of a stove in the real world. It's not just the stove by itself. Get the cook to tend the fire right. Make sure that you understand what kind of cooking is going on in what kind of pot. Make sure the pot fits well over the stove and oxygen supply is controlled but adequate. And make sure all of that works with the right kind of fuel that's available locally.
All these variables had to be taken into account as designs were tested. After months, they finally had a functioning prototype. But a prototype isn't a product until it can be manufactured in a realistic way. Enter Ken Chow.
When I heard about Dr. Asher Gadgil and the Darfur Stoves project, it seemed like a really good match because in addition to being a volunteer with Engineers Without Borders, I'm also a mechanical engineer here at Lawrence Berkeley National Lab.
It would be Chow's job to determine how the stove could be mass-produced in Darfur. Depending on the availability of materials and tools, they'd either be manufactured from scratch or assembled from pre-cut metal patterns called flat packs. But both methods would require a nuanced understanding of resources in Darfur.
This pile of wood represents the amount of wood needed to cook a full meal for a family of 7 using a 3-stone fire. This pile of wood represents the amount of fuel wood needed to cook the same meal for the same size family in the same pot, but with a Berkeley Darfur stove.
The team finalized the design in 2009. Since the project began, nearly 40,000 stoves have been distributed to refugees. But that's only 10% of what is needed by people in the camps. The Stove Project is now headed by Potential Energy, a nonprofit. Although the stoves are distributed for free, it costs the group about $20 to make a kit from start to finish. The kits are assembled in Darfur in a workshop operated by camp residents. More than a quarter of the stoves are sold to nearby villagers, bringing steady money back into the camp economy. About 70% of the stoves are in regular use. That means the women have taken fewer dangerous trips outside the camps and save more money on fuel. But fuel efficiency isn't the only problem with traditional cook stoves, and the problems aren't unique to Darfur. 3 billion people in Asia, Africa, and Latin America still use stoves that burn wood, coal, animal dung, and other materials to prepare their meals. Every year, about 4 million people, mostly women and babies, die from diseases related to smoke inhalation from these fires. In 2013, the U.S. Department of Energy came to Gadgil with a new challenge: design an affordable, efficient wood-burning stove that produces 1/10 the pollution of a traditional 3-stone fire. Today, Gadgil heads one of the most advanced stove testing labs in the world and is well on the way to achieving the goal of a clean-burning cook stove. Next year, he hopes to begin training engineers from around the world to operate similar labs in their countries.
This project gives me one more reaffirmation that use of modern science and engineering technology can go very far in solving desperate problems of people who are at the very bottom of the economic pyramid.
"27 miles off the coast of San Francisco, a group of tourists arrives at the Farallon Islands.
At any given time around this island, we have 30, 40 great white sharks.
A private company called Great White Adventures has taken them out to the islands.
Look that way.
Their goal is to have a close encounter with a great white shark. Each fall during the seal breeding season, large concentrations of great whites come to this very spot. Marine biologist Scott Anderson is a fan of the fearsome animals.
It's an apex predator that's on that same level as lions and tigers. It's a symbol of a healthy environment. And as long as you still have those kind of symbols out there, then you know your environment's intact.
Scientists estimate that up to 3,000 great whites are thriving off the coast of California, protected by state and federal law. But close to half of the world's shark species are threatened, and this could be disastrous for the oceans, says Peter Knights of the San Francisco-based conservation group Wild Aid.
In some cases, the skates and rays have increased in number because the shark numbers have gone down, and that's led to shellfish declines because they eat the shellfish. Tuna might reduce in certain areas because the animals preying on the tuna, like the seabirds and other species, were being kept in check by sharks.
One of the greatest threats to shark populations is the practice of catching sharks to cut off their fins. Economic growth in China fueled a sharp increase in the demand for luxury items like shark fins, which are used to make a celebratory soup. The trend set off alarms among conservationists.
We always see with these products, be it elephant ivory or rhino horn or shark fin, when one particular component of an animal becomes very valuable, all the rules go out the window and it's a free-for-all, and those animals are going to be in serious trouble.
In 2010, the Monterey Bay Aquarium showed a video of shark finning to Assemblymember Paul Fong, who represents parts of Silicon Valley.
I felt that was a very horrific and cruel act. And I found out that from marine biologists that it was happening to about 73 million sharks every year. And I felt that we needed to protect our sharks, because without our sharks, our ocean's ecosystem would go into a huge imbalance.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
In the Assembly, Fong's bill to ban shark fin sales in California ran into charges that it was culturally insensitive.
Shark's fin soup is considered an honored traditional delicacy and is served at many of our sacred occasions, such as the birth of a child and the union of two people. To many in my community, this bill represents a direct attack on our culture and tradition.
Despite the controversy, lawmakers passed the ban, and it took effect in 2013.
It closes off the borders to the shark's fin trade. California is the port that it comes into, and so we close off the port and we close off the shark's fin trade to North America.
Chinese restaurants specializing in celebratory banquets have had to come up with alternatives to shark fin soup. At Koi Palace in Daly City, owner Willie Ang wanted something as rare and expensive as shark fin soup, which he had sold for $20 to $100 per bowl.
Fin soup is like a royal banquet. So every time when you serve your guests with that fin soup, they feel that, wow, the host must be so wealthy and so appreciate you guys coming. So the why it become like a custom. People feel like they serve the shark fin soup during a banquet because it's prestigious.
In the kitchen, Chef Kam Sum Tong is preparing soup for 2 birthday banquets. A broth made with chicken, pork meat, and ribs, ham, and spices simmers for 7 hours. When it's ready, instead of adding shark fin pieces, he adds an ingredient called bird's nest, which he has previously soaked in water. The nests are made by swallows with their own spittle and are harvested mainly in Indonesia and Vietnam.
I'm sure in some places there's all kinds of abuse going on, the way the nests are collected, and it may be damaging the populations, but it's probably more sustainable than shark fin.
Like shark fin, bird's nests have a long tradition of being served in soups. Bird's nest soup is one of the 9 dishes at the banquet that Gloria So is throwing for her mother-in-law's 80th birthday.
Bird's nest soup is made out of the spitting of a bird as they make the nest. Yeah. And if you ask my children, they'll tell you that it's really gross. But I told them, you've eaten it before, so it's fine.
Even though he's complying with the ban, the owner of Koi Palace is part of a group of restaurant owners and distributors who have challenged it in the courts.
Shark fin has been a gourmet, prestigious ingredient for Chinese banquet, or people like it. So when they ban on the shark fin itself, I feel like it's a discrimination.
But a federal judge has ruled that the ban isn't discriminatory. As of 2014, California and 8 other states have banned shark fin sales. The bans are part of a broader effort. In China, WildAid has been running PSAs starring famous Chinese figures like NBA player Yao Ming.
请记住，没有买卖就没有杀害。
By reducing the demand for shark fins, the group has brought down their value.
We had people go undercover to fishing villages in Indonesia, and what we found there was, compared to when they went last time in 2007, between 2007 and 2014, the price had dropped by 80% that the fishermen were being paid for the shark fin, and therefore the fishermen were deciding not to target sharks anymore.
a banquet like this, my family is perfectly fine not to have shark fin on the menu, and we understand the reason for it. As the world changes, we need to really protect all the various species that we have out there.
And environmentalists hope that changes like the ban on shark fins will help these predators sustain the delicate balance of life in our oceans. Aspiring astronauts dream of floating around in space, untethered. But scientists have found that the human body actually needs the pull of the Earth's gravity in order to stay healthy.
We have evolved in a one-gravity environment. So it's not surprising that few of the systems that we have developed require gravity for normal function.
Roger, how does it look?
This is a reality that astronauts have been experiencing since the inception of NASA's landmark Apollo space program in the 1960s. Behind the scenes, several astronauts paid a physical price for the Apollo-era exploits.
15 of the 29 astronauts either became ill during the flight or upon return, and that was unusual because these are really healthy people. Hayes on Apollo 13 got very, very ill, and he had a respiratory infection. Some just had what seemed to be head colds.
Fast forward 20 years to 1991. San Francisco-based molecular biologist Millie Hughes-Fulford became the first woman to travel into space as a working scientist.
It was unbelievably incredible because it was a dream. And not everyone gets a dream.
She was part of NASA's first mission dedicated exclusively to the medical sciences. Her job was to carry out experiments for scientists from around the world. In one experiment with rats, she investigated why space travelers become sick. The research focused on immune cells called T cells.
If you think of an army, and the army being the immune system, the general would be the T cell. It gets the message, oh, we have an invader, and it sends out signals to make antibodies, to start eating up all those extra little bacteria. It's the general. It regulates the entire immune system.
The research found that in space, T cells don't send out the signals they're supposed to. As a result, space travelers can become sick.
Now we believe it's gravity that's causing the changes, and the T cell needing gravity in order to function properly.
We'd like to show you what we did on this mission.
When Hughes-Fulford returned from her 9-day mission, she became one of a small group of scientists who regularly send experiments to space.
Okay, so we're ready.
Her team at the San Francisco VA Medical Center is preparing to send her 9th experiment into space in 2014.
You have to be patient, you have to plan ahead. There's zero error because you get one shot.
With this experiment, Hughes-Fulford hopes to understand which genes in our immune system malfunction in space and what causes them to fail.
The gene chip we're using right now, it'll give us all the answers we need. We're able to look at every gene that's turned on, every gene that's turned off, and we find out which pathways are not working in spaceflight.
Her lab members extract T cells from donated human blood, simulate an infection, then place them in a machine that mimics a zero-gravity environment.
Spinning the cells from a cell's point of view eliminates the gravity vector that we experience on Earth.
The experiment's results could have far-reaching implications, both on Earth and in space. If humans are ever going to explore other planets, scientists will have to figure out how to keep them healthy for years at a time in space.
Hopefully, it will aid astronauts that are going to Mars. It will aid those of us back on the ground that are getting older. And so our hope is that we can apply the new knowledge across the board to anyone that has an immune problem.
The story of how the Hawaii resident became one of the world's 57 women astronauts starts with a little girl in Texas.
I grew up in a very small town called Mineral Wells. My father got the first TV in town. I would wake up on Saturday mornings and watch science fiction. Buck Rogers.
Lieutenant Deering calling the air control at Hidden City.
Wilma Deering was his pilot. She wore pants and she flew the ship, and I thought that was really cool. I love space. I just loved it. I wanted to be an astronaut. Then growing up, I realized at the age of 16 when I went to college that women were not astronauts. Gee whiz, why didn't I catch on to that before?
By the time she received her PhD in biology and chemistry, she had a daughter, and she had figured out that her ticket to space would be a career in the sciences.
Oh, I think it's nice.
A decade later, now working in San Francisco, Hughes-Fulford finally got her chance to become an astronaut.
So we're taking people from the university level and that were assistant professors and saying, do you want to go up? And it's a 2-year commitment. And so, of course, I jumped right in and applied.
And this is your first time through, right?
In Houston, the 7 astronauts who would crew the medical sciences mission prepared not only to perform the experiments, they also trained to be research subjects.
Before, we had had missions that had one experiment here, one there, but this was the first one that was totally integrated, looking at people, rats, jellyfish, across the board.
These are the jellyfish.
We were supposed to go up in January 1986, but our rat cages weren't working properly, so they postponed us and put in the Challenger. People were joking about, oh, the school teacher got your place.
That's Krista McAuliffe, our payload specialist, teacher in space.
Thank you. Mission Control, Houston.
At NASA, you always sit and you watch the launches. You just watch. So we were looking for an intact shuttle. And when we didn't see it, we realized that the entire shuttle had exploded. Going into space is not a risk-free business. And I think everyone on board any shuttle knows the risk.
Payload specialist Millie Hughes-Fulford is making her first trip into space today.
5 years went by before the medical sciences mission finally launched in 1991.
Liftoff of Columbia on the first dedicated medical research flight.
Every day we would go through an exercise bike, breathing, because they were able to measure the change in our bodies from day to day on every experiment. And so it was very powerful to see the loss of energy in our muscles in the exercise. We had more data going down than any other mission ahead of us ever.
Roger that, Columbia. Welcome back.
Her time in space piqued a lifelong interest in how the body fares without gravity. She sent up a string of successful experiments on shuttle missions, but her work came to a halt when the Columbia exploded on re-entry in 2003.
And Columbia, Houston.
NASA's dedicated science shuttle was gone.
We decided we would forge ahead. I made a few calls to NASA headquarters. I was told that we might be able to get it up on Soyuz.
Hughes-Fulford found a way to repeat the experiment she had lost on the Columbia. In 2006 and 2007, 2 of her experiments left Kazakhstan on board Russian Soyuz capsules headed to the International Space Station.
Peggy, Yuri, and Chef, please take care of my experiment P kinase.
And Hughes-Fulford continues to adapt to change. Now that NASA has closed down the shuttle program, she's found a new way to send her experiments to the International Space Station from the United States. Her 9th experiment left Cape Canaveral, Florida in April 2014 on board a flight by SpaceX, one of the companies pioneering the privatization of space travel.
The Dragon capsule comes back just like the Apollo capsules came back. into the Pacific Ocean. SpaceX then goes out and retrieves it.
Hughes-Fulford's experiment, which landed in the Pacific Ocean a month later, was among the first to be carried by SpaceX. Another first in a career full of them.
I have had the luxury of being able to wake up in the morning and have a new thought and go in and test it, to have experiments, to make new findings. I'm very excited that we're able to have the opportunity to use space as a tool to study the human body.
Support for Quest is provided by the National Science Foundation, the David B. Gold Foundation, the S.D. Bechtel Jr. Foundation, the Dirk and Charlene Kabcenell Foundation, the Vadasz Family Foundation, George G. and Jeanette A. Stuart Charitable Trust, and the members of KQED. Quest is a project of KQED Science.